On a fog-swept street at dawn, Henry Carter drove slowly through quiet coastal roads of Windermere, his hands steady on the steering wheel, while the pale light of morning struggled to push through the dense gray mist rolling in from the sea. The ocean was somewhere beyond the veil, its distant rhythm humming beneath the silence of sleeping houses and shuttered shops. Beside him in the passenger seat sat his 8-year-old daughter, Astrid, her small fingers twisting the colored faces of her Rubik's Cube with effortless precision. Windermere was the kind of town where people minded their own business, a place where the abandoned cannery had become an artist district, and old boat houses leaned tiredly toward the water like aging sentries. It was also the kind of town where a single father could raise a child quietly without questions about who he used to be before he arrived. Henry Carter was 36 years old, a refrigeration technician who lived in a modest wooden house beside his workshop. To most people in Windermere, he was simply the man who fixed air conditioning units and repaired commercial cooling systems along the harbor. But there was order in everything he did, from the neat arrangement of tools on his wall to the deliberate way he mapped out emergency exits in every room he entered. That order came from another life. Before Astrid had been born, Henry had served in a military technical unit specializing in survival protocols and non-lethal combat operations. He had seen enough of that world to know how quickly safety could dissolve into chaos. When his wife died shortly after Astrid's birth due to complications from a medical procedure that had never been fully explained to him, he left the service behind. He chose instead to give his daughter a normal life, somewhere far from the machinery of institutions that protected themselves at any cost. Between Henry and Astrid existed a simple covenant built on 3 principles they never lied about: safety, truth, kindness. It was the framework of their world. On the wall of Henry's workshop hung 2 relics from his past life: a tactical flashlight capable of emitting disorienting strobes, and an old CB radio he had never quite managed to throw away. They were reminders of skills he hoped never to use again. They would save lives before the story ended. Astrid Carter was 8 years old, sharp-eyed and endlessly curious, with a habit of humming softly while she solved her cube in under 2 minutes. Her father sometimes suspected she listened more than she spoke, cataloging sound the way he cataloged exits. "Dad," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. Henry glanced at the side mirror. "There's a lady." At first he saw only fog and brick, but then movement resolved itself into the shape of a woman crouched low behind a short wall bordering an alley. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt, her clothing torn and streaked with mud, as though she had crawled through the rain rather than walked across it. Henry pulled the truck to the side of the road and stepped out into the mist. The woman saw him approaching and pressed herself flatter against the bricks, her wide blue eyes filled with something beyond ordinary fear. This was not panic. This was prey that knew the predator was close. "Don't come closer," she whispered hoarsely. Henry stopped 10 feet away, raising his hands slightly to show they were empty. "Don't tell anyone you saw me," she added, trembling. "Who's hunting you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head sharply. "If you know, you and your daughter will be in danger." The way she said daughter told him everything. She had noticed Astrid immediately. She was calculating threats even now. Henry had learned to read people years ago in situations where hesitation meant death. What he saw in this woman was not madness or guilt, but clarity. Exhaustion and starvation were evident in the hollow lines of her face, yet her gaze remained focused, measuring distances and angles even as she shivered. Behind him, Astrid climbed out of the truck. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The woman's expression changed, just slightly. "I've been better, sweetheart." Henry made a decision then, the kind that divides a life into before and after. He noticed fresh mud on her shoes that didn't match the pavement. He saw that the security camera on the corner had been twisted deliberately away from this section of wall. And somewhere in the distance, beneath the hush of fog, he heard the low rumble of a large engine moving slowly through residential streets. "Come with me," he said. "There's an empty storage building next to my workshop. You'll be safe there. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it after you're somewhere warm." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. Henry helped her to her feet, noting the way she flinched at sudden movements, as though expecting blows that never came. When they reached the truck, Astrid leaned closer to him and whispered, "She's really scared, Dad." I know, he replied quietly. That's why we're helping. The storage building had once housed boat equipment back when Windmere's fishing industry was thriving. Now it was little more than dust, tarps, and rusting shells, but it had walls, a roof, and a door that locked from the inside. Henry brought water and a clean jacket, while Astrid appointed herself sentry by pressing her ear to the wooden wall, listening for unusual sounds. It was a game to her. To Henry, it was tactical advantage. The woman drank slowly, methodically. She refused to give her name at first, but Henry noticed a surgical scar along her wrist that looked like it had come from emergency trauma care. He had seen enough news coverage 2 years earlier to recognize it. You don't have to tell me who you are, he said quietly. But if we're going to help you stay hidden, I need to know what we're hiding you from. She studied him for a long moment before reaching into the lining of her torn jacket and pulling out a thin solid-state drive no bigger than a credit card. Astrid stepped forward suddenly and pressed something into the woman's hand. It was her Rubik's Cube. You can keep that, Astrid said gently, so you don't have to be scared. For the first time since they had found her, the woman smiled. Thank you. That night, Henry set up a perimeter rotation, checking the exterior every 2 hours. No lights were to be used inside that might be visible from outside. No phones, no electronic signals. Astrid took her role as listener seriously, sitting cross-legged with her ear to the wall and reporting on passing engines, footsteps, and seabirds. The covenant of safety was expanding. Just after midnight, the black SUV arrived. It moved slowly down Windmere's main street, its windows tinted so dark they reflected nothing. When it stopped in front of the closed newsstand, a man in a dark jacket stepped out and approached the elderly proprietor, locking up for the night. Have you seen a blonde woman? He asked. The old man shook his head. The SUV continued its patrol, like a shark searching for blood in dark water. Henry heard it before he saw it. He had been adjusting the CB radio in his workshop when he tuned to a rarely used bandwidth and caught fragments of communication. Target sector wouldn't appear, no visual confirmation. He switched off all the lights in his house and moved to the window. The SUV passed 2 blocks away. When it was gone, Henry returned to the storage building. They're looking for you actively, he told the woman. Not just watching. Hunting. She closed her eyes. I told you anyone who helps me becomes a target. Astrid sat in the corner, solving her cube again and again, a nervous habit she used when she sensed tension she didn't fully understand. Why do they want to hurt you? She asked. The woman looked at the child, and something inside her expression cracked. Because I know something they don't want anyone else to know. Henry knelt beside his daughter. Go back to the house and lock the door. If you see headlights, use the code knock. After Astrid left, he sat across from the woman in the dim storage room. I don't need your whole story, he said quietly. I just need to know if you want to live. She placed a drive on the workbench between them. I want to, she whispered. But if I live, I have to bring everything I know with me. Henry nodded once. Then we find a way to do both. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant whisper of the ocean and the creak of settling wood. Finally, she spoke. My name is Audrey Lancaster. Henry absorbed the name in silence. Audrey Lancaster. 2 years ago, every news channel in the country had carried her face. The youngest CEO of Lancaster Biotech, a pharmaceutical rising star accused of embezzling millions from a children's charity before vanishing in what authorities called a fatal boating accident. The official story said she had stolen the funds and died at sea before she could be arrested. But the woman sitting across from him now was very much alive. The corruption investigation that destroyed my company was a setup, Audrey continued, her voice low but steady. A distraction from what was really happening. We were running unauthorized pharmaceutical trials. The subjects were orphans, children with no families to ask questions when they got sick or disappeared. Henry felt something cold settle into his chest. I found the documentation, she said. Forged consent forms, falsified medical histories, test subjects identified only by number. When I confronted the board, they turned on me, manufactured evidence of embezzlement, planted stories in the media. Then they staged a boating accident. What's on the drive? He asked. Executive meeting footage, experimental logs, subject identification numbers. Everything needed to prove what they did. Henry touched the smooth plastic surface of the device. It looked harmless. It was also a death sentence. From that moment on, they were in it together. The SUV returned the next night. This time, it stopped directly in front of Henry's house. Through the window, he watched with men, later identified as Finn, step out and approach the front door. Henry moved quickly, accessing the workshop's compressed air system and releasing a controlled burst that created a localized fog bank thick enough to obscure the porch completely. At the same time, he grabbed a tactical flashlight from the wall and positioned himself at the back exit. When Finn stepped onto the porch, Henry activated the flashlight's strobe function. Blinding pulses of light erupted through the artificial fog. In the confusion, he guided Audrey out the back door and toward the abandoned boathouse facing the water. Behind them, Finn cursed loudly as he stumbled, temporarily disoriented. Inside the boathouse, Audrey's hand shook again. "They'll keep coming," she whispered. "Let them," Henry replied, "but they'll have to work for it." He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. They needed copies of the drive. They needed legal protection. They needed allies who couldn't be silenced all at once. By morning, Audrey had told him everything. About the meetings where Dante Grayson calmly discussed phase optimization, corporate language that disguised experiments conducted on vulnerable children. About the forged documents and the moment she realized legitimate research had turned into something monstrous. "I kept copies of everything," she said, "but paper trails can be destroyed. I needed video evidence." "How did you get it?" "I broke into the executive conference room after hours and placed a wireless camera behind the smoke detector. I recorded 3 meetings before they noticed." Henry nodded slowly. "We don't go to journalists," he said. "We go to lawyers and federal agents." "You know people like that?" "One," Henry replied. "William Harris, retired FBI, paranoid as hell, and he owes me a favor." They began building a plan. An encrypted backup of the drive would be hidden inside one of Henry's air conditioning units, somewhere no one would think to search. William would be contacted through an old CB code from Henry's service days. If everything went wrong, Ashley would evacuate to the pine forest cabin at the edge of town or to an abandoned church 3 miles north. She knew both locations. Preparation Henry had hoped never to use. That night, Ashley returned from school with mud on her shoes and a strange look on her face. "Dad, there was a man outside today," she said quietly. "He asked if I'd seen a lost lady." Ice crystallized inside Henry's chest. "What did you tell him?" "I said no, but he was holding my Rubik's Cube. It fell out of my backpack." The message was unmistakable. "We know about your daughter." At 3 a.m, the phone rang. The voice was electronically distorted. "Leave the drive at the wooden pier," it said. "The child stays safe." Henry hung up without responding. "They're threatening Astrid because of me," Audrey whispered. "They're threatening Astrid because they're desperate," Henry corrected. He activated the evacuation protocol. William Harris agreed to meet at dawn at the ferry dock. But when Henry arrived, the retired agent wasn't alone. A surveillance sedan with government plates watched from across the lot. William approached carefully and slipped him a key card. "Dead drop," he murmured. "Box 87 at the post office on Marsh Street. I'm being watched." Inside the box was a burner phone and a handwritten note. "Trust Alexandra Pierce. She's clean. Get her the evidence." While Henry worked to contact a lawyer, Dante Grayson launched his own counterattack. Sympathetic media outlets began circulating a story that Audrey Lancaster had embezzled millions before faking her death. If she went public now, she would be dismissed as a criminal fabricating accusations to avoid prosecution. The trap was tightening. Inside the storage building, Audrey was losing hope. "Maybe I should surrender," she said. "At least your daughter would be safe." "You told me not to tell anyone I saw you," Henry replied. "Now I can't pretend I haven't seen justice." He inserted the drive into a laptop. The video files were devastating in their mundanity. Quarterly budget meetings where executives discussed acceptable mortality rates for developmental compounds. Spreadsheets listing identification numbers instead of names. Human lives reduced to line items. We get this Alexander Pierce immediately, Henry said, but we can't send it directly. We create a dead man switch, Audrey replied. If she doesn't hear from us in 72 hours, she releases everything. The next call came that evening. This time, the voice was not distorted. Henry Carter, Dante Grayson said smoothly, former military technician, father of Astrid, age 8. I know everything about you. Then you know I don't scare easily. I'm offering you a choice, the drive or your daughter's future. You've already hurt children, Henry said coldly. Those were subjects, Dante replied, not children. The line went dead. They moved that night. Henry transmitted a false CB signal claiming he would exchange a drive at the abandoned warehouse on the northern shore of the lake. The real drive was already on its way to Alexander Pierce. Vivian Moore prepared the press release for immediate distribution once federal authorities moved. The warehouse would be a trap, but it would spring both ways. Henry rigged the interior with reflective surfaces and angled lights, creating a maze of disorientation. Cable trip wires stretched ankle-high across the floor. The tactical flashlight was positioned for maximum effect. Audrey insisted on coming. This started because of me, she said. I should be there when it ends. Dante arrived with Finn and lay in shortly after dark. 3 men in expensive suits stepping into rust and decay. Audrey emerged from the shadows, clutching Astrid's Rubik's Cube like a talisman. Give me the drive, Dante said, smiling thinly, and I'll let you disappear again. She held out a decoy. Leyen stepped forward and stumbled hard as Henry released the cable trap. Finn reached for a weapon. The flashlight ignited. Strobing brilliance multiplied by mirrors into chaotic white hell. Gunfire barked once. Henry felt heat graze his shoulder but kept moving, locking Finn's gun hand with practiced joint hold. Then, sirens. Federal vehicles surrounded the warehouse. Floodlights turned night into day. Dante's expression went still. You think this ends anything? He asked quietly. No, Henry replied, but it's a start. At that exact moment, Alexander Pierce uploaded the complete archive to a federal evidence server. Vivian Moore distributed the press release to every major outlet. The dead man switch activated, not by death, but by victory. Lancaster Biotech stock collapsed within hours. Congressional hearings were announced. Criminal investigations spread through executive ranks. The orphan test subjects were located and a compensation fund established. In Windermere, life slowly returned to something like normal. Henry's shoulder healed. Astrid hugged him tightly enough to steal his breath. Audrey finally allowed herself to sleep without fear. 6 months later, cleared of all charges, she established an independent foundation dedicated to protecting test subjects and funding ethical research, moving its headquarters to Windermere. Henry became its facilities manager. Astrid painted a sign for the workshop wall. No lies, only light. One warm evening in late summer, the 3 of them walked across the wooden bridge at the edge of town as the setting sun turned the water gold. Audrey handed Henry a small key, the one that had once opened the safe containing the original drive. What is it? He asked. Proof that someone can be trusted completely. Astrid turned from ahead of them and grinned. You're staying in Windermere, right? Audrey smiled. More than all right. Behind them, the CB radio sat silent. The tactical flashlight hung unused, and the covenant that had begun with safety, truth, and kindness had grown to include one more person. As they walked into the gathering dusk, Henry glanced at Audrey, the woman who had once whispered, "Don't tell anyone you saw me. Do you want me to keep any more secret for you?" he asked. She took his hand. "No," she said softly. "From now on, let the world know. We chose the truth."